Jake Hirschman here with Dan Rossetti from Ascension Sports Partners. Excited to discuss leveraging relationships with him today. Dan, excited to get into kind of networking, finding your champion, making authentic connections. We'll get into it. So appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. Thanks for having me.
So as you're thinking about, the experience as a college student and leveraging relationships, right? Relationships can mean many different things. That could be your professor, that could be your, career coach in the college, that could be your friend. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of it could be your mom and dad, right? There's
Yep.
a lot of different ways in which you can leverage relationships. So when you're a college student and you're kind of just going about your way, where do you start if you don't know that many people? Maybe you're introverted and you're not a big networker, or hey, let me go out and meet all these people. Where do you start?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And over the years, as I've spoken with many students, I get asked that a lot of just where they should even begin with the process. So, one of the things that I always suggest is just start off initially by just creating a list of your connections, just a simple spreadsheet that's just any of your connections that you feel that you could comfortably reach out to. That could be your parents, that could be your friends of your parents, that could be current or former professors, even somebody from a school, your high school that you worked with, that you have a good rapport with and a good relationship with. People in your community, maybe you played sports, maybe you didn't, maybe you were involved in drama club, whatever the case may be. You may know some others that can help you, your church, etc. Like just things in your community, that people that you can initially feel comfortable with, because you're absolutely right that a lot of times it's hard to take that first step, to make that phone call to say, hey, this is what I'm looking to do and I need some help, or I'd like to employ your help moving forward with this. So start with people that you feel comfortable with and ask them. And just when you reach out to them, just explain, but just be very, very brass tacks of just explain what you're looking to accomplish by saying, hi, my name is Dan, hey, this is Dan Rossetti. I don't, you're friends of my parents. I wanted to reach out because I didn't know if you might know of anybody that works within the sports entertainment industry. As I've, finished up my first year in college, I've decided that maybe this is something that I'm interested in taking a look at. And I'm trying to just learn more. I'm trying to learn more about the industry. So I was hoping that, maybe you might know of someone, or you might have, come across somebody in your time in business that it might be smart for me to speak with. Um, you know, that's just as simple as it starts. Start with that. And then, it's surprised because I think too many students, when you look at it, you try and pinpoint your networking approach of, oh gosh, I've got to talk to the president at this, Major League Baseball team, or I have to be connected to the director of marketing over here at the NBA, for them to help you out. No, I mean, you'd be surprised, Jake, that, sometimes the people you expect to help you the most, or the people you lay out there, end up being the ones who, not help you the least, but they really don't have time, or they're just busy. When sometimes the people that you think that, oh my gosh, I ran into them once, or they're a friend of my parents and I've never met them, they will go above and beyond to help you out. So I mean, like, that's where sometimes the first process begins, in being able to list this out.
Yeah,
If you go to Yeah, go ahead.
it's a great point because look, if you think that you're in with the president of this team, or the director of marketing at the NBA, there's probably another 20 to 30 to 50 students that have the same in, right? And
Correct.
so again, it's finding those people that are unique to you, that are really
Correct.
going to go to bank. And I think, Dan, to your point about being in the sports and entertainment industry, somehow, some way, right, there's that 6 degrees of separation. One way or another, you can get to someone,
Hmm.
and it may not be the exact job or the exact place that you're thinking of, but there also might be a way that you get connected just through general business,
Hmm.
right, that may end up being a sponsor of that team, and then
Yep.
they're connected to someone, right? And so again, you never know how you can get to someone, or what you can learn, right?
Yep.
Because if you all of a sudden learn from that sponsor why they sponsor this team, well, that's a learning, action item that you can then take, not only as a brand, but then also to another conversation to say, hey, I spoke with Dan, he sponsors your team, and here's why, right? And
Hmm.
then you talk to the other person. So again, long-winded, but I think it's important to understand how things are connected.
Yeah, and I mean, and to even piggyback it, and I'm gonna, talk about this, a little bit later on. You know, it's the pay it forward mentality of even if that person you speak with ultimately can't help you, you might be able to help them in the future. And and those relationships outside of sports entertainment even still will help you become just a better overall, just person in the industry or person in life, just because you'll be able to be thinking about, okay, I talked to this individual, they're maybe involved in insurance, and at the time they really didn't have anything to match, but you may ultimately end up speaking with someone who's like, that's a business that says, we're running through a tough time. We got a new project, and we've been talking about, who's going to insure our project that we have coming up, and instantly you think of them and you can connect the two, and it just makes the networking process better. The other thing I was going to say that, if you run through that list, Jake, and you also then kind of strike out, or you're having a hard time, for those of you in college and universities, you've got one of the best basic starting networking places to begin with, and that's an athletic department. You can walk to the athletic department and just start looking for volunteer opportunities. You can start reaching out to the different people in the different departments and learning. And just by reaching out and saying, hey, I'm a freshman, I'm thinking about sports entertainment as a field. I'd love to learn more about what you do. And then just start from there to learn. And that will help you kind of just build your network, and start kind of figuring out how you can leverage the relationships in the future in a positive manner. Just because it'll help you decide maybe even a little bit better of, all right, this is something I want to do in my career, or you know what, maybe this isn't something that I want to do in my career. So
I think finding out, right, one way or another, it's like sooner the better in
yeah,
terms of the
yeah,
direction you want to go, because don't waste your entire time in college going, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then you get out of college and you're like, I don't really think so. And look, there's plenty of people that that happens to, and then they go on to have wildly successful careers. So I'm not saying you can't,
yeah.
be successful, but again, use the 45 years that you have to, take advantage of those opportunities and the people that you can meet. Dan, when you think about making authentic connections, though, it's one thing to make a connection with someone, uh, but how do you know if you've made an authentic connection, and how do you know kind of which way to take that conversation? If it's very very just informational, as a follow up, like how do you know how good your relationship is, and what do you base it off of?
That's a great question. So I think authentic relationships start with just a kind of a give and take. I mean, like you can't always be known as the person who takes everything in a relationship. I tend to use the term of as a freeloader. As someone who always asks for something and always asks for something, but never ask that person, can I help you with anything, or is there anything I can and do for you, or when that individual comes back. So after the first conversation, for it to be authentic, I think it always engages further follow-up. I mean, like I think one of those things that is, it's not an instant, and it's something that's built over time. It's a relationship. Any of us that go through just relationships in general, sometimes you may strike it off, strike it off with somebody, but then 2 weeks later they're not returning any calls, they're not returning anything. So you have to just it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you have to realize that sometimes it's just going to take being able to just reach out and just kind of touch base. They will follow up with you. If they don't follow up with you, don't take it again as someone that maybe didn't build an authentic relationship with. They just may be busy. So it's understanding. And again, I'm a big believer in again the servant mentality of just how can I also help them. So if they are following up with you to say, to check in, or they ask you, hey, follow up with me in 2 weeks, you better make sure you follow up in 2 weeks. I mean, like that is somebody offering you, giving you a chance to come into their relationship. Um, but it's hard because at this age, as a student, you're still learning just general business, kind of acumen 101 of just when you follow up with someone, how you talk to them on the phone. Once you get them on the phone, how do you follow up with them? So don't come off very scripted. Just, I mean, come off and envision them. It's a business relationship. They're taking the time, respect their time, And then, and then always look for opportunities. If you see something and you hear something about their company or their department or their group, send them a quick note and say, congratulations, I saw the news that you did, you sold out the arena for the 15th time in a row, or I saw attendance increase 10%. You can send those notes. That's how you build authentic relationships. It's over time.
Yeah, and I think vulnerability is that most important piece in those conversations of, don't be afraid to ask when you should follow up or how to
Hmm.
follow up. You say, how would you prefer I follow up with you?
Yep,
Right? It's
that's
okay to
right.
ask that question, because we all know that different people prefer different ways of communication. Someone might say, hey, Dan, send me a handwritten note, and they just want to see if you're going to do it. And if you
Hmm.
do, right, you're kind of building that trust factor. And so I think that's a very easy question to ask, is just, how
Yeah.
do you prefer I follow up and when? But also, rule of thumb, right? Like, I know as a professional, you might get the email and you just flag it. And then 3 weeks later, you go back and you're like, all right, I need to follow up with this student. It doesn't happen right away sometimes,
Yeah.
but to be patient, right? Because we're in this world now of, instant gratification. You're waiting for that. You're like, I sent an email today. They've got to respond by tonight, right? It's like, not necessarily. So, rule of thumb, like, do you give it 3 to 4 weeks, then maybe you follow up again if they don't respond? How do you go about that?
Yeah, it's funny, and it makes me think back to a story of my first job. And for everybody listening, I didn't initially start off in sports entertainment. And that's a whole other story for another day of how I made the transition over. But I did recruiting and search within the information technology field, and my company kept pushing me about, well, did you get an answer on the interview? Did you get an answer on this interview? Did you get an answer on this candidate search? And I finally got put in place by one of my clients, a manager, one day when he said, Dan, I really like you and I love the work you do, but understand, today you are priority number 10 on my list to get back to, because I have fires going on here, 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 and here. This move is not the top priority. So while it's important to you, please respect and understand that it's not it's not as urgent for me. So that was a huge, moment for me, that I learned that you've got to understand that, you're not always the number one priority for these people. And just because they aren't there, or they don't follow up right, immediately, that it don't take offense to it. So, I went off. As you were telling that story, I had to remember it. I forget what you just asked me, Jake, of the question.
No, it's perfect. I think just that whole concept, right, of understanding priorities, understanding patience, understanding that someone will get back to you. And one thing that I did to kind of build those authentic relationships and keep people in tune as I was a college student is I would send out an update email every 3 months. If I had, and I made sure that I had something new going on to be able to give an update. And if I didn't,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I'd wait, till month 6.
Yeah.
I would send out that update and I blast it out to my entire, as you mentioned, kind of keeping that spreadsheet. I'd keep that spreadsheet of people and I'd send it out. And I would get probably 60, 70% responses. And I knew that the other 30, 40% that didn't respond, they probably saw it. And I just kept them on the list, right? And then
Yeah.
the next time I sent it out, some of those people would respond and they'd say, hey, thanks for keeping me up to date. Saw your note before, whatever, right? So
Yeah.
again, it's that consistency. It's building trust, I think, in people to just know that you're going to communicate on a consistent basis.
And two things to piggyback off of, which are, one of the key things as you're networking, what's going to make, and kind of jumping back to the authentic relationships, is learning how to be a tremendous listener. Be a great listener in the process to the network, the person that you're speaking with and that you're connecting with, because you're going to hear things that, if you follow up with that person later on and you ask, hey, you mentioned you had this big project coming up, or you had this, this new opening that was going on, or you had this big campaign that you were working on, how did that go? If I'm on the other end and someone remembered exactly what we talked about a couple weeks ago, you can, you can be sure that you're automatically moving up in the level of authentic relationships that I have, because you took the time to listen. One thing that I used, and like an update email, but one thing that I used in one of my first jobs and first roles was, our managers in our company used to call it a tickler file. And in the old days, I'm going to date myself here, when we had a Rolodex as opposed to what everything that was online. I would list list connections, Monday of the first week of the month, Tuesday of the first week of the month, and so forth. So I had like 2 or 3 people that I knew over a 2 to 3 month period that I was making a touch point with, and that may be following up. And on that little card that I had with them, I mentioned, they mentioned their son or daughter plays basketball. They mentioned they're moving into a new home. So that way, when I followed up appropriately on the next steps, I could always drop in a little note that said, "Oh, it looked like, how'd your son or daughter's basketball season go?" Yeah, I mean, like again, it's just building those authentic relationships to your point of listening. But I think your question a little bit earlier, as it's jogged in my memory, was what is the appropriate time to follow up? When is the appropriate time to follow up? So if, to your point, Jake, about asking for, flat out asking, hey, how would you like to stay in touch? Or how often, do you mind, if I reach out to you every couple weeks, via phone, via email, if, at that point. But if they don't say anything, or you haven't heard from them after that first time, I think the standard rule of thumb is usually every 2 to 3 weeks, you could ask and you could follow up without becoming a nuisance. We jokingly like to call it pleasantly persistent in the recruiting side. You want to be persistent, but you don't want to become that nuisance. So you need to find that avenue, and that, every couple weeks you just drop them a quick note, you follow up with a voicemail. You could even leave the voicemail first and then, follow up with the email to say, hey, I left you a voicemail earlier today. Just wanted to follow up on our conversations. I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. I'd had a couple questions that came up in my pursuit of understanding the industry a little bit better. I'd love to schedule some time over the next few weeks to talk further. Done. And just leave it at that. So I think, at that point, I think a good time, once you realize that maybe this person has kind of fallen off the map, because it'll happen, where you'll network and then ultimately somebody will just kind of, stop returning calls. After about the first 6 to 9 months, if you stop kind of getting that response, then you just, you make a note just to touch base with them once a year and just kind of let it be. But you don't focus in on it quite so much.
No, that's a great point. You don't have to have the same type of relationship with everybody, right? And it's not, as look, as a student right now, you might go, oh, these are my 10 people. Well, then that becomes 200, which becomes 400, which becomes 1,000 once you're into the working world. And you can't there isn't enough hours in the day to keep in touch with everyone. So then you start to understand, again, which ones am I going to leverage? Which ones am I just going to kind of let be, a colleague in the industry, and we'll touch base every 6 to 12 months. Right. And it may be 2 years before you touch base, and that's okay. But again, as you get started, I think that important component of consistency is huge. And then just continuing to practice, right? Because when that champion comes along your way, you know how to handle that champion who's going to fight, go to bat for you and make those connections for you. Dan, last thing as we wrap this one up is, we started this off of where do you start, right? And I guess, as you're moving through your college years, where do you want to be when you get to be a senior or you're in grad school and you're graduating, right? Where do you want to be so that kind of where you need to work backwards, right? If you're a freshman now and you go, okay, this is where I want to be with my relationships by the time I'm done with college in order to be able to be successful in that next step, where do you need to get to?
That's a great question. I think the place that you want to be is you want to be to a point with your network to where almost you've built your own network that people will come to you with. Maybe that freshman comes to you now as a senior and says, oh, I need to meet Jake Hirschman because Jake Hirschman has built up a great reputation. So there's that component of it. But with the contacts that you've made, it's just continuing to stay relevant and stay in connection. I know that doesn't sound as definitive, but sometimes it's just as simple as that of being in a position to where you can then make the next step, because now as a senior you're probably going to be starting to look for that full first time role. So now your kind of your connections leverage or kind of shift from I'm just trying to learn more about the industry and I'm trying to learn more about this to, hey, you know what, now I kind of need my connections and my network to help me find a job. and to find that first job for me. So I think you start shifting that mentality where you've built up such a comfort level that that individual in your network will actually be a champion for you and risk their name when you see a position out there. Say I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, so you see a position with FC Cincinnati or the Cincinnati Bengals that your connection has a good connection with, that they will go out and say to the Mr. and Mrs. Manager over at FC Cincinnati, you should really take a look at Dan Rossetti, because I've gotten to know them over the last couple of years, and they're authentic, they're true, they've accomplished this throughout their time in school. You should definitely include them in the mix to find out if they're the right candidate for you. That's where you want to build it to where they'll put their name on you potentially for an introduction. Because to our earlier conversation and our earlier point about the sports and entertainment industry is 6 degrees of separation, we have to be very judicious on who we put our name on, because if you don't represent that person well, then it looks just as it looks poorly. Just as if that person succeeds, it looks great. So you just have to be very respectful of that, and that's where you want to kind of get your in my opinion, where you'd want to get your relationships to.
No, that's a perfect wrap up to this session. So Dan, really appreciate your time talking about leveraging relationships. Obviously, there's plenty more to discuss, but really kind of providing that foundation of where do you start. Appreciate the time.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Jake.